So the next speaker I have the absolute delight of welcoming is actually a partner at IDEO. IDEO is an award-winning global design and innovation company doing some remarkable work. And our next speaker is incredibly passionate about helping brands create new connections with their consumers and communities in ways that also bridge the gap, the collide between the physical and the digital world. This next talk, I know, is going to help all of us incorporate a deeper sense of design thinking into our work and into our everyday. So please help me give a huge 15 seconds welcome to Emily Kolker.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Love to see the fact that this room is still so full, considering there's a race car driver upstairs, and I am no race car driver. I'm here to talk to you about design, slightly different than our former speaker, but how design, I believe, can help us change the world for better, and how all of you, many of you I have met, many of you I haven't, can also consider yourself designers. I'm going to start in a rather uncomfortable territory, setting the bar really high, with a quote from Einstein. Many of you may know this quote. "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Once again, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Not how to tackle today's big problems, but how to change your thinking so that you're better equipped to tackle those problems. So I'm going to ask you now, close your eyes, picture a list of 10 big global problems. OK, you've got that list. I'm not giving you long because I'm sure there's overlap in many of our lists. Now I'm going to ask you to do the next thing. Continue picturing that list, cross out problems, and replace it with opportunities. So you've now got a list of 10 opportunities. At IDEO, we believe that design can change the world because it gives us the tools to tackle those problems differently by turning them into opportunities. It starts with the thinking. I work with leaders, big and small, established, mature, as much as developing. And in most cases, whenever I work with a leader and there's a problem, they start with a hypothesis, well-intentioned, but a hypothesis that starts with the capabilities, the assets, and the strengths that exist within their business. Designers don't do this. Designers don't start with a hypothesis. Designers start with questions. Very specifically, questions that are laser-focused on trying to understand the needs of the person closest to the problem you are trying to solve. I'm going to give you a real example. This is a US food bank we worked with, and they had a problem. This food bank provides groceries to people in need, but people were having a tough time picking up groceries. And on its face, it seems like a really simple logistics and transportation problem. You could just solve it by simply adding delivery times or more pickup options. But this food bank did something differently. It paused. It sought to look for opportunities in the problems it had. It asked questions. So it turned those problems into opportunities and asked questions like, who uses food banks? Why do they use them? Why don't they use them if they're eligible? How do they feel about using a food bank? Does all the food that they buy get used, or does some of it go to waste? How would they describe their experience to someone who's never used a food bank? And what about on the food bank side? What problems, what pain points were the people there experiencing? And on and on and on. The conversations they had turned into insights. And those insights caused them to look at the experience entirely differently, no longer looking at that siloed problem. What did they do? They became the very first food bank in America to open a digital pantry. A digital food pantry is an experience that can be shared much like an online grocery shopping experience that you've had. Somebody has a need, goes to a site, sees what's available, puts food in their cart, checks out. They didn't just solve one problem. They solved many problems. We learned through the process by talking to all of those individuals that people wanted choices. They wanted choices, and those choices, when they got them through the food, increased customer satisfaction, it increased referrals, it increases the reputation of the food bank. And it didn't just address the person picking up the groceries, but also the person cooking the groceries, the person eating the groceries, new users, prospective users, a whole ecosystem. And on top of that, we learned through the process that we were able to reduce food waste. Why? Because when people have choice and they choose the foods that they actually want to eat, less of it goes to waste. And the food bank can then also have better supply and demand signaling with donors and suppliers. So it made it an inclusive solution. It made it a climate-friendly one. Two critical lenses through which we should be looking at all innovation today. Now, some of you may be thinking, a digital food bank. It's just a digital transformation. It's not such a big idea after all. And you'd be right. The truth is that there are a gazillion great ideas in the world right now, and as many bad ones. The difference, though, is that we don't have enough people who can identify great ideas. It's not the fact that we don't have enough ideas, it's people to identify great ideas. And great ideas are ones that can solve a problem and meet an existing or a latent need that somebody actually has. Not that you suspect somebody has, but that someone tells you that they have or indicates to you that they have. So I'll give you a counterexample. This is a company, intentionally cheesy stock photo, because I can't talk about the company. This is a successful private company, and they had an internal brainstorming session, an innovation jam, and came up with a great idea. Got everybody aligned, decided to move forward in implementing it. For those of you who work at big companies, have been through this process, that was very truncated. It took a matter of months. But they didn't speak to their constellation of users. They didn't speak to clients, consumers, policymakers, licensees, franchisees. They talked to each other. They talked to each other, and they promoted confirmation bias because they were so focused on implementing this solution. And the saddest part about this is that they actually missed the opportunity to identify a need that they were best suited to solve for, not simply execute on an idea that they thought was a good idea. So we have to first look at the problem from the perspective of the person most impacted by the problem that we're looking to solve. We have to start by asking questions, not from a business-first perspective, looking to confirm a hypothesis, but with genuine curiosity. And we have to look at something as an ecosystem, because problems and people aren't siloed, and solutions aren't either. And on top of that, we have to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion, and climate lenses, because it's irresponsible not to. OK, good news, bad news. Switching gears slightly. Questions can be a game changer, but they're how you get started, they're not how you finish. Although we talked about brand design in the prior session, when I talk about design, I talk about a process of gathering human insights, using those insights to then develop prototypes, prototyping quickly with users, iterating, then asking what would need to be true in order to continue to move forward and get to a solution. This is a way of testing assumptions, but it also changes our view. It changes our view from solving a business problem to solving a human problem. It changes our view from a focus on speed to market, like that company I just shared with you, to a focus on speed to value. That's the power of design. And it's critically important because that list that you created, those 10 opportunities, none of those can wait. OK, you can't think your way to a solution. You have to be a maker. And I've met a number of you in here, and I believe that every one of those people I have met are creative problem solvers. And all of those who I haven't met are also creative problem solvers. That's how I labeled myself, too. Emily Kolka, creative problem solver, was on my LinkedIn. And I have done things that would warrant or substantiate that type of label. On the left here, you can see after 9/11, I was working with teenagers from countries with predominantly Muslim populations, fostering exchange programs with the US at a moment when discrimination was rife to create better understanding. In the middle, moments when budgets were tight at a company I worked at, I developed an internship program that brought new perspectives into the company, new ways of working, helped managers reconsider how they could do peer mentoring, and then ultimately create a pipeline of talent for when budgets were healthy. And I also painted houses for a few years. And I worked often with very tricky clients and would get questions like, could I get black wallpaper on my ceiling? Questions as ludicrous as that, and I would try and understand, using that process to gain human insights, why? Are you trying to make the room cozier? Are you trying to make the room seem bigger, smaller, sexier, reminiscent of a hotel? What I was doing was using a process akin to design. And it wasn't until 4 years ago when I joined IDEO that I realized I could call myself a designer. I could upgrade myself from creative problem solver to designer. Because being a designer isn't about having a degree from an arts college or having a craft or a hobby that is widely recognized as artistic. Being a designer is about employing a mindset, developing behaviors and practices that supports those mindsets. And I think everyone in this room can consider themselves a designer. I'm going to go through some of those mindsets and behaviors and practices very practically. So, mindset number 1, together is better. I will be the first to admit that I'm guilty of sometimes seeking efficiency. Sometimes I think it's faster to just do things if I just do them by myself. But it always comes at the expense of richness. When we have collaborators, when we seek out collaborators, what we do is we ensure that we have diversity of perspective, that we don't see the world through that one lens. Like Einstein said, it would only be the same thinking if I didn't have those collaborators. When I work with others, somebody else's strength is my weakness. Somebody else's experience fills a gap in mine. The way somebody else thinks makes me question the way that I think, and together we get to more and bigger possibilities. It requires that collaboration. And so I so hope that each of you are finding people in your day-to-day life, finding people at this conference, in your social networks and your professional networks, to ask them to critique your work, to make you better, to help you find more possibilities. This ensures that we do not design for ourselves. We cannot afford to design for ourselves. It is how we got into the mess that we got into today. Mindset number 2. Work should be joyful and inspiring. Too often, we're trying to get from point A to point B. At IDEO, we believe that play is critical, that it encourages risk-taking, creativity, experimentation. We believe that it promotes a journey that makes the journey itself as intriguing as the end goal. And it drives curiosity. It drives our sustained engagement. It makes us want to talk about the work we're doing. It makes us want to involve other collaborators. And I'm going to share 3 examples. Very quickly, here on the left, this is a magic bus we created for kids to help them imagine what it could be like to work in STEM. In the middle, using game mechanics to help people quit smoking and build resiliency. And at the end, an escape room to help mayors explore what cybersecurity policy management could look like. Different ways in, made joyful, with very impactful endings. Third mindset. The future is optimistic. I genuinely believe this. Now, when we tell people that the world is burning, there is urgency. People wake up, no question. But research has shown that fear-inducing cries such as these are counterproductive in the long run. They work in the short run, they don't work in the long run. And this is important because it does not spark action, and particularly when we're talking about things like climate, it sparks climate anxiety. And it contributes to the mental health crisis that we've already heard about on this stage. Instead, the other side of the coin is scientific evidence that shows us that positive thinking really can lead to better thinking. And even more so, I love this piece of research. Barbara found that negative thinking narrows one's thinking. She also found that positive emotions like joy and interest, they broaden your mindset, and they promote the discovery of novel and creative ideas and action. And creative ideas and action are exactly what we need to bring to the table today. At IDEO, we work with a number of companies to help them bring their climate commitments to life. Probably many of you have got climate commitments, a whole list of things that you're trying to do, and then you're paralyzed, not sure how to actually act on these. I know a lot of companies like this. What we help companies do is we help them imagine possibilities. We help them get excited about those possibilities, and then we very pragmatically demonstrate progress against those possibilities. This is a company that we've been working with, a software accounting company that aims to help millions of small and medium-sized businesses it works with thrive on their way to net zero. And what they've done is they've made use of the data that they have to analyze what each of its customers does, and they've calculated their carbon emissions. They've then used this carbon accounting to inspire behavior change, and they've fed this back to their clients over specific touch points with very actionable ways to help them make changes towards reducing their emissions, all within the flow of their day-to-day operations. We also work with H&M. I'm very proud of this work. Over the last couple of years, H&M has made dramatic improvements in terms of reducing e-commerce waste. They've reduced 2,000 tons of plastic from packaging, and they've invented a new paper packaging solution that uses 97% of renewable energy. So you can lead the way in your industry and make innovations happen, but this was not easy. It required us to talk to people in the warehouses as much as people who are responsible for actually thinking about distribution, supply, buying, etc. We do all of this by putting into practice what I talked about, questioning the full ecosystem of actors, iterating, prototyping, doing things joyfully, as well as giving very equal weight to social, cultural, ethical, and ecological considerations for responsible innovation. This is not an afterthought. This is built into a process. And we often talk about an inclusive process, but we don't talk about it in pragmatic terms. Pragmatically, what it means is gathering the right historical, social, ecological, ethnic context. It means working participatory practices into your design process. It means listening to the stakeholders that you have in your ecosystem and letting them drive the direction instead of you driving the direction, instead of you designing for yourself. This, however, is less about a mindset, it's about a practice. So let's jump into our practices. I'm going to share two of them today with you. Reframing the question. That food bank that I talked about, a big thing we had to do was reframe the question from a business one to a human-first one. Since the 1960s, the thing that they had measured was pounds out the door. 1.5 pounds of food equaled 1 meal. Sounds rather out of touch with what stakeholders and customers might actually want. So we spent time with them reframing the question from, are you distributing pounds of food? To our customers getting what they need. Practice number 2, valuing qualitative data as much as quantitative data. It can be so easy to fall into the trap of simply using qual, what people tell you, for storytelling, for marketing, anecdotes, on top of other things, but using the quant, the numbers, to make decisions. That's a mistake. You need that varied data spine. Through the food bank, we learned that they don't get very many condiments. And if you just look at the data, it seems inconsequential in terms of the pounds of food out the door. But if users tell us that they will enjoy the food more, they will purchase the food more, they will use the food more, they will reduce less waste because there are condiments, salts, spices, sauces, then that's what we should be doing. But you see how looking only at the data, only at the quant versus the qual would impact that decision. And of course, talking to all of the various people means that we get that diversity of perspective, makes sure that we understand those interdependencies, and that we create champions, people who can talk about the solutions, people who can promote the joy in the work, people who can then move towards sharing a common goal and a common process to get to that solution. So I'm going to end now back to Einstein. He said that we need to use new thinking to get to a new future. We have to design for those closest to the impact, not for the businesses, the institutions, and the people who got us into this mess to begin with. We have to ask people before we form a hypothesis, so that we're taking a people-first approach. We have to solve problems in the context of an ecosystem, so that we understand the knock-on effects. And you can all do this as designers. You have to adopt the practices and the mindsets that help you do it. And I shared 3 mindsets with you and 3 practices with you. And I highly encourage you to spend time thinking about these, because the opportunities on your list, those 10 opportunities, they just cannot wait. Thank you very much.
Emily Kolker, everybody, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I was taking notes backstage just listening to you. That was spectacular. I have about 17 questions for you, but before I shower you with questions, I'm sure there are other people with questions in this room. So you know the drill. Raise your hand nice and high. We have volunteers bringing mics, and I think we have our first question right back here. Yes, please.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your great presentation. I wanted to ask, like, on this journey becoming a designer, how can I get confident enough to ask those questions that are needed, and just to say, okay, I'm confident enough to say I'm a good designer and I'm becoming a good designer every day, just a little bit more?
It's a great question. I have 2 ways in which I'd like to respond to that. One is inspired by you. Yesterday you said that your partner suggests that you always approach things with intrigue and curiosity.
Yep.
That's the first thing I would say. Never stop asking questions. Ask questions from the perspective of really wanting to learn, and then start seeking patterns in what the answers are to those questions, because those patterns are going to lead you to think about what might you design and how might you design it differently. So that's the first part, is the curiosity. The second part, in terms of confidence of being a designer, that's about that network of people around you. People who you are not afraid to ask for support from. What do you think of this? Why do you think that? What could I do better? Feedback, in my opinion, is a gift. And we don't ask for it enough. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to give you feedback if you just ask. I have a gazillion people who reach out on, maybe that's a little exaggeration. I have a number of people who reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, could you have a look at this? Most of the time I say yes. It takes me 5 minutes. The end result is better designers in the world, more people solving important problems in a way that is considerate and responsible. That's something that I think many of us share. But one thing I would say, just in terms of holding back, is there is no one way to be a designer. I work with communications designers who do a lot of the branding that was just talked about, as much as business designers who think about business modeling and venturing, as much as organizational designers who are thinking about community and the rituals and the rhythms within organizations that help them thrive.
I'm so glad you added that, Emily, because yesterday a lot of the conversations are around being put in boxes,
Yeah.
right? We feel like we need to fit into categories, but of course, design is like 1,000,001 different categories,
That's right.
and you can stretch between all
That's
sorts.
right.
We have another question right here, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question. I'm working for a big company, Austrian company, and we think we have to change because there are some problems that we have to solve. And there are theories like you have to create sense of urgency that the management is willing to change. And how do you think can positive thinking and sense of urgency, how can they work together, or how can we create a sense of urgency with positive thinking?
Great question. I have a very strong belief that change comes from 2 things. It comes from mandates and movements. It can't just be the groundswell. And although there is a lot of employee activism that's impacting organizations, and it can't just be the top leadership. So the first thing is thinking about what's your socialization strategy to engage a wide variety of people who are close to the customer, who are close to the operators, and senior management who may be in influential or decision-making positions. That's the first aspect. The second aspect that you talked about is demonstrating change. There's a company called Public Digital. Public Digital redesigned the whole government digital services. And one of the things that Ben Terrett, their CEO, says is show the thing. Don't talk about the thing you're going to do, show the thing. And I have 100% belief in that. The more you can demonstrate progress through something very real, so start small, uncomfortably small. Start with an area of friction or an area where there's low-hanging fruit. So you can demonstrate to both sides of the people who are building that movement for you that you can do this and what it might enable. that OK?
I love that. Other questions we have in the room? Please raise your hand nice and high so we can bring a microphone to you if you have a question. I see one right here. Yes, please. Justin, is it?
Yes, it is. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
My question for you is, at the very beginning, you talked about how it's really important to change your mind when you're looking at the design process. How do you yourself work with other designers and your clients to push them away from the strongly held schemas and beliefs that they hold to really approach the design mindset with the mind of a child, something fresh and new and innovative?
I love that. I also have two answers to that. I very strongly believe that my job is to get inspired. It's not an afterthought. The reason I'm here is not just to talk, it's to get inspired. My job is to inspire other people. And I work on the day-to-day with clients. Don't get me wrong. I'm not just standing on a stage. I have to be inspired to inspire others. That's the first thing. And I share that inspiration with clients, all within the organization. Hey, I saw this. Hey, I read this. It made me think of you this way. Or have you considered this? So that's number one. Number two is actually within the organization is working with a set of champions. It seems so obvious, but those champions end up just extending your capacity so that you can make that joy, sprinkle it, pepper it, however you want to call it, throughout the organization, but with real things. Not with decks, with real things that you're making, with the voice of the person you're designing for. Vox Pops. I started out in advertising in the 90s. I used to have to go around and just interview people in parking lots. Hear the voices of the people you're designing for. Says a lot more than if I was the person to say it. So stay inspired and inspire others. Do it on a proactive basis. It becomes a practice. Something, it's not just a knowledge base, it's a practice that you have that you can hone. And then use the voice of others to share your voice in many different ways, because there isn't only one way of saying it. And do that around something very specific.
I love that. And I love the use of the word practice, because it really empowers everyone in here, regardless of the physical function of your role in your company, to be a role model, to start leading this kind of change and play in your workplace.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Emily Kolker, everybody. Thank you
you
so
very
much.
much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So good.